Welcome to this McKinsey Global Institute virtual event.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Olivia White. I'm a senior partner and a director of McKinsey Global Institute. So we are here today to discuss findings and themes linked to a recent MGI report, which was titled Help Wanted, Charting the Challenge of Tight Labor Markets in Advanced Economies. And we'll also pepper in a lot of discussion about other recent MGI research on future of work, human capital, AI, productivity growth, all of these topics. And as always in these things, we'll kick things off with a little bit of a presentation by my colleague and co-author, MGI partner Anu Madgavkar, and she'll share the findings of our most recent research in particular. And then we will switch to a panel discussion that I'm really excited about. And I'll introduce it in just a second. And as always, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. But that said, please ask questions as we go, and we'll try and bring in some of your questions to the conversation itself as well. Before I pass to Anu, let me first introduce our panelists. So that's David Otter and Sir Christopher Pissarides. So David is the Rubenfeld Professor of Economics at MIT. And David, I hope it's okay if I say before you stumbled into economics, you were a college dropout and a self-taught mechanic. And you were recently profiled in the Wall Street Journal in a profile that titled you or described you as the economist who figured out what makes workers tick. So expectations are high.
I still don't know what that means, by the way, but I appreciated it.
And Chris is a Nobel laureate, and he's Regius Professor of Economics at the London School of Economics. And he is also, we're lucky to say, one of McKinsey Global Institute's academic advisors. But before that, Anu, could I pass to you to talk about the research?
Sure. Thanks, Olivia, and hi, everyone. I think we have some slides that we should put up. Yeah, that's great. So as we think about what's happening in the labor markets, it's clear that there are a few different things going on. And as employers or policymakers or indeed workers, it's really the interaction and the confluence of these things that are shaping outcomes. Labor markets have indeed been tight. They've been amongst the tightest they've been in several decades. But alongside that, there is a real challenge of productivity growth, making more with the people that you have. And that's related to labor market tightness in some ways. It's something that most advanced economies are struggling with, some sectors more than others. At the same time, we have this tremendous promise or potential that comes from technology, from automation and AI. But clearly, as the deployment potential lies ahead, so also does a reskilling challenge. How do you prepare the workforce to adapt to this new future? And in turn, is that going to help address the tight labor markets or not? So given all of this, what really does it mean in terms of actions that employers and policymakers could consider? And that's really the focus of what we look at. So moving ahead, let's just put a dimension to what we mean by tight labor markets. We use here this useful metric of comparing vacancies or job openings that are posted by employers and comparing that to the number of job seekers or unemployed people in different economies. And we really step back and look at this over time, starting with the aftermath of the great financial crisis when unemployment was high, and ever since then, people have been coming back into work. But this multiple or this ratio of vacancies relative to job openings or job seekers has been steadily rising. And in economies like the US, Japan, and Germany, that multiple is more than one. So there are more vacancies today than job seekers. In several other economies, it is less than one, but it still has been sort of rising fairly consistently. You saw the oscillation during COVID, lots of unemployment, and then labor markets sort of readjusted and vacancies bounced back up. But in general, this is a long upward trend in just the sheer number of vacancies relative to job seekers. So that's one part of it. But that pain of labor market tightness isn't being felt uniformly around the economy. There are certain kinds of sectors and certain kinds of occupations and skills that are facing this to a greater degree. As you'll see on the next page, It is really sectors like leisure and hospitality, healthcare, and construction in particular, where the vacancy rates across a range of countries, these are averages for 7 countries, but vacancy rates have generally ticked up the most in sectors like leisure and hospitality, healthcare, and construction. And they have risen across all sectors, but to a smaller degree in areas like financial services, manufacturing, or information technology, for example. So the perspective actually is different based on which sector you are in. You can also think about vacancy rates in terms of the underlying types of skills that employers want or need. And here we bucket vacancies into 5 groups of skills. And we see 2 things are happening at the same time. On the one hand, it's the bucket of technological skills where vacancy rates are the highest today. So unmet need for skills is highest in technology, a range of computer and software occupations, for example. But the vacancies that have grown the most are represented by physical and manual skills. So pretty much at the other end of the skill spectrum is where the trend or the momentum of unfilled jobs is actually the highest. And this is very clear when we look at the kinds of occupations where vacancies have grown the most. Using US data here, we look at occupations in terms of where the share of vacancies has risen more versus less. And we see that in the top half of that distribution, it's really occupations like food prep or installation and maintenance or building-related occupations that have contributed the most to vacancies. But these are occupations that typically involve more than 50% of their time engaged in physical and manual skills. And again, at the other end, at the bottom end of this distribution, you see other kinds of occupations where vacancies have grown, but not really grown as fast. And the share of physical and manual skills is so much lower in those occupations. So it shows a real pattern of the kinds of skills that employers are struggling to meet. There's a role there for technological skills, but much more for basic physical and manual skills, really. So moving to the next page, we also see that the second trend we talked about, which is productivity growth. And this matters to labor market tightness because in some ways, productivity really means producing more using the same resources, essentially. So with the same people, can you organize yourself better or use technology to actually meet market demand while not having to actually employ people, for example, to do that. And across advanced economies, very broadly, we see this structural decline in productivity growth. It's been particularly sluggish in the post-financial crisis era. And the question really is, can technology, for example, help to address this? So looking ahead on the next page, we take a forward-looking view of the nature of changes in work that are likely, just given fundamentally technological change, but also other dimensions to employment demand, such as climate change and the adaptation and mitigation strategies underway. But focusing on technology, we do find that with developments in AI and automation, as much as 30% of current work done could potentially be automated in the coming 7 to 10 years. But again, it's a certain kind of occupation that's more automatable. And as you think about more routine cognitive work in office support, for example, that's more automatable than occupations that involve more unpredictable settings or more physical and manual types of work. So you see healthcare occupations are fundamentally going to be less automatable. Nevertheless, employers really do have this opportunity to automate more work and bring in more AI, depending on the kind of work that opens itself to this. So given this, which kinds of sectors are going to grow in labor demand, and are we really going to be geared up to meeting that need? Looking across Europe and the US and just projecting out a scenario in which automation is deployed based on the potential levels that we anticipate, along with the other trends we talked about, we find there will be robust job growth actually in sectors like healthcare, but also sectors that involve technology development, design, and deployment. And we actually see a reduction in net employment demand going out to 2030 in occupations that involve more production work or office support and those kinds of things. So one of the big implications for tight labor markets is that employers have to facilitate a process in which workers actually move out of declining occupations into occupations that are growing, what we call an occupational transition. And this is a process that's going to be necessary if labor markets are to sort of adjust to this new pattern of demand that we anticipate going forward, and for economies to therefore, to take advantage of the productivity growth that would involve. We find that in Europe, this rate of occupational transition is significantly higher, almost twice as high as it has been in the past. Whereas in the US, occupational transitions have just happened at a higher pace already, and the transitions going forward appear much more in the zone of what they used to be in the past. And the big question for employers in Europe versus the US and in countries in each of these regions is really to say, can we facilitate this higher rate of occupational transitions to address both labor market tightness and the productivity challenge? To give you just a flavor of how this transition process can unfold, we looked at tech skills as one bucket of skills where labor markets are short of the kinds of skills that may be required in the future. And this is just one example from the real life sort of career journey of a tech worker who started out as a customer service representative, but then went from role to role and occupation to occupation and learned new skills on the job in that process. And then Olivia sort of alluded to this when she referred to David's own story of a more dramatic example of how such occupational transformations can actually occur. But in the realm of digital and tech skills, we find that more than 40% of people today in such roles actually started out in non-tech roles. And it is therefore a big opportunity for employers to think about widening their pools of talent as they try to address roles that are in short supply today by really enabling such role mobility and job mobility. We also took a look at which companies tend to do a good job of this. And on the next page, we have this analysis of almost 2,000 companies around the world. We've sort of grouped them here based on two dimensions. On the vertical dimension is financial performance over a 10 to 15-year period. And on the horizontal dimension is how good companies are on human capital development, which is investing in skilling and creating opportunities for their workers to kind of reskill and reinvent themselves. And there's a set of companies, the top right-hand corner, we call them people and performance winners because they actually excel on both dimensions. And there's a really important message here to say that it's these companies that actually have more consistent and more resilient long-term performance. So you also have performance-driven companies which do well on financials, but don't really focus that much on building human capital. But it's the P plus P winners that do it more consistently and sort of withstand shocks and crises better. And they do it by facilitating more internal role moves for their employees so that they have an opportunity to try out new things and learn new skills and actually rotate around their organizations. They also do it by investing more in training, by retaining talent better, so they have lower attrition rates, and creating an organizational culture that really facilitates collaboration and learning by doing with on-the-job coaching and development and collaborating with teams that teach you, new kinds of skills in a much more concerted way. And so finally, as we reflect on sort of all of these different labor market trends, just wanted to flash up these sort of 4 big implications for both employers and policymakers. Clearly, the need to think thoughtfully about technology and what parts of work you want to automate and what sorts of reskilling that would require. At the same time, strengthening talent value propositions through more flexible career paths and facilitating this kind of job and role mobility we've been talking about, as well as looking wider beyond the traditional narrow definitions of the kind of people that can do different roles, but to broaden the talent pool that you actually look at. And there are similar implications for policymakers as well along all of these. So with that sort of super quick overview, would love to hand over to Olivia and then really have the conversation around some of these themes.
Chris, David, maybe I can welcome you in and we can start our conversation with tightness. As Anu said, our research reveals the degree to which across multiple economies, labor markets have grown tighter over the past 15 years or so. On the other hand, if you sit, for example, as I do in the US, there's a lot of discussion right now about, well, what's happening to labor markets? Are they cooling off? What does that mean, at least in the short term? So David, maybe I can start with you. And do you see some form of tight labor markets persisting into the future? And can you just describe how you think about it?
Sure. Thank you very much. So we are, demographics is one of the more predictable forms of social science. And we've known this was coming for quite a while, that the, baby boom cohorts have now passed into retirement or near retirement age. Fertility has been much lower than immigration also was restricted substantially during the Trump administration. And the end result is our population has gotten a lot older. And that creates, you might say, we have a smaller workforce, or the growth of the workforce is the slowest it's been since the founding of the United States, actually. And it's basically plateaued, and all net population growth comes from immigration at present. And you say, well, why is that a problem? Why is it a problem to have a smaller workforce? Doesn't the economy scale with the number of people? And the answer is, well, when a workforce contracts or stops growing, it's not like you lose people uniformly across the distribution. It means you have relatively more retired individuals than working age folks, and so they expect to have the retirement that they work for. And so it means that you're asking, you need more output per young person just to provide both for themselves and for the population that has earned a retirement. So that's the situation that we and much of the industrialized world are in. Fertility is, below replacement in almost all of Europe, except for basically Scandinavia. In Asia, it's even lower. In Singapore or Korea or Japan, we all know as Japan has gotten much, much older because of reduced fertility. And then China also has a substantial demographic challenge. So we will be facing this for a while to come. Now, there are many ways to address it. It's important to underscore that the scarcity of young workers in the rich world is a result of policy, not destiny, because of course there are many young people throughout the world who would be delighted to come to the industrialized world and work, and they benefit from that. So policy could change. It doesn't seem poised to do so, but that is an option that's available to us. I think last words here. The COVID pandemic really created a big demand push and so that kind of really foregrounded this issue. I think things are getting back to closer to normal relative to the immediate post-COVID years, but back to normal is a trend of tightening labor markets.
Right. Yeah. So there's a trend that's at the back of it all. Chris, your thoughts on labor tightness and will it persist? Anything to add or to disagree with?
No, I agree entirely about demographics. We know where population is going. In fact, in Europe, the forecast is that population will be declining unless we increase immigration. So there will be shortages. What I would like to add, though, is that hours of work might fall per worker as well, because there's now strong evidence that as societies become richer, people take more time off. The United States is a little bit of an exception here in that hours don't fall as much as they do in Europe and elsewhere when standards of living rise. But if you look across the OECD as a whole, the more productive countries, like Germany, especially more productive European countries like Germany, Netherlands, the Scandinavians, in Sweden, Norway, and so on, work much less per week than the less productive ones. In Southern Europe, for example, in fact, the OECD, the country that works the longest hours is Mexico, which is also the least productive country. Within Europe, it's Greece, which is just a little bit more productive than Mexico, but still below. So that's likely to cause labor tightness as well, because we get fewer people coming to the labor force and working fewer hours.
So all of this seems to add up to saying either output falls or we need to figure out ways of getting more people into the workforce in advanced economies. David, would you agree with that? And you talked a little bit about immigration, but if you would add a little bit more on your thoughts on, you've got both potential for people coming in, foreign board workers, but you also have potential for older people to continue to work longer. There's still certainly a gender imbalance in labor force participation. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, well, so first let me underscore something implied by what Chris just said, which is that as countries get richer, people work less, and that generally means we should be happy about the tight labor market. It's not all bad news, right? We've been in a slack labor market for a long time, and it's been really bad for young folks, and especially people without high levels of education. And part of the rise of inequality is the falling or at least stagnating earnings of people without college degrees, and now they're rising as a function of tight labor markets. So, a world in which labor is highly abundant, well, that sounds like a lot of the underdeveloped world, in fact, where people are underemployed, they're begging for work, and there aren't enough jobs to go around. So I would much rather have the problem that we have, and in fact, you could have too little of a good thing. So right now, overall, this is a period, right, that we're in of rising employment population rates among the young, and falling inequality, and a rising real wages among people without college degrees, something we haven't seen in the United States for quite a long while. So I would gladly take this over where we were in 2010 or 2001. But in terms of margins of adjustment, so Japan, for example, for a very long time had extremely restrictive immigration and very low labor force participation by women. Now Japan's labor force participation rate among women is higher than almost all of Europe, and certainly higher than the United States. Now, I'm not sure, they don't think they've achieved equality in the type of work they're doing, but that's a starting point. It's also welcomed more immigration, something that Japan had been historically loath to do. So I think this can go too far. I mean, in Japan, you really had a serious problem of not being able to staff, having people who were in their 70s and 80s unloading trucks, having not enough people to staff stores and so on. So it's important to respond to it. And then, of course, productivity growth would help a lot, right? So more productivity growth means getting more out of the labor we have. And we're in a period where we have a lot of technological opportunities to do that. And also employers will use workers more productively when they're scarcer. They will invest in better tools and better training because they realize they need to get more out of the hours that they have. So there's upside and other margins of adjustment. So it's a manageable problem and in some ways a good problem to have.
So this question of productivity growth, and Chris, maybe we start with you, but it would be great to talk about it for a little while. What are the sorts of concrete things that either are happening already, right? I mean, is AI going to be the answer to this, or that employers need really in a concerted way to think about in order for productivity growth to really take root? Or does a tight labor market, just force you into that as because out of necessity?
I know productivity growth is such a big question, and you get such diverse views from economies, business people observing what's going on. And I think the reason is that when you see the new machinery coming on, when you see AI and the amazing things it can do, you can say, oh, we can be so much more productive when we do that. But then go down into the labor market and see what the vast majority of people are doing, and then ask, will really AI cause a revolution in these jobs that will increase productivity or almost without limit, almost going back to where we were before the financial crisis or in the 20th century? And the answer is obviously no, because we have a service economy. Most of the output that goes into our GDP is a person-to-person provision of services, and that's what people still want. For example, even customer service. In a very detailed study of all the online ads that we did in Britain, customer service is a skill that came up very high in what employers want from people that they're hiring now, because they're into business, although a lot of business is done online, and the platforms that we now have for retail, they've grown enormously and all that. But go down though into the market, and you see that there are even more people coming in from shops, offices, and so on. And that productivity there, it cannot increase with what we know now. It cannot increase substantially. Because if you go back to the 20th century, mid-20th century, when we had a vast growth in productivity, the reason we're doing it was all coming from manufacturing, because with the electrification of appliances, homes were equipped with all kinds of electric appliances that industry had to produce and supply. Everyone was buying new, and that was a kind of growth that we get in productivity, labor productivity, what each worker employed could bring out and supply. That I think we're never going to see again.
David?
So let me agree and then extend. So it's absolutely the case that so much of our productivity growth in the post-war era, post-World War II era, came from getting better at making stuff, right? Cars and appliances and houses and roads but now an increasing share, a very much larger share of our consumption is in education, it's in healthcare, it's in legal services, it's in design, and those are low productivity growth areas. And so if you ask me, would I rather get 1% more productivity growth out of healthcare or manufacturing, I would say healthcare. It's a bigger part of the economy, and it's more consequential. I think there's some hope that AI can help in some of these arenas. Traditional computing was really, really good for manufacturing because it follows rules and carries out procedures, and a lot of manufacturing is about repetitive processes. And what contemporary AI is good at is not at repetitive processes. It actually can't keep facts straight or do math, but it's good at more of the paperwork, of the generation of content, and it could and also for decision-making tasks. Let me actually say that's actually the more important part, for decision support. So I could see AI being relevant for healthcare to allow people at all different levels of medical care services to extend the range of patient care tasks they could do. It doesn't mean anyone with a machine can do that work. I just mean someone who's trained as a nurse practitioner or a nurse or a nurse aide could do a broader range of diagnostic and care tasks. I see in education, it used well, if we're effective, it could allow teachers to cater or to adjust curricula more individualistically for students. In legal services, it could allow potentially paralegals to do more contract writing and document writing. In software, it could now speed up the process of writing code. So I think there are ways, there's a hope, and it's only a hope, it's not a prediction. The AI has potential to be more useful in the parts of the economy where we have slow productivity growth and have had very few technological breakthroughs that have been really transformative. So I think that would be the upside scenario. It remains to be seen. That's certainly, we don't have evidence yet that is or is not happening.
I agree with that. It's a smallish part of the economy, as David very correctly said, but it's something that could happen, especially with paralegals and lawyers. I'd like to say something actually about the previous point about women and older people. I'm very, very supportive of measures that will incentivize both more women and more people over 65 to engage in the labor market, because it gives you a more diverse, more interesting life. There is more engagement with other people. It's a more complete life, if you like, if you have the facilities. If you have the option, if you like, because of what businesses are doing, because of what government is doing, but mainly businesses, to engage more people who may not find it possible to work from morning to evening, 9 to 5. But although this will give us more output, because we'll be able to fill more of the job openings that Anu was talking about before, and we will get more output coming out. Don't confuse it with productivity. If anything, productivity will go down if more people are engaged like that, because they will go into the service sector, and they're not likely to be the people with the most advanced education and all that. Otherwise, they would have been in the market in the first place. It would be wonderful if we can find a way of doing it. And Japan succeeded, Sweden and Denmark succeeded in Europe as well, more than anywhere else. But don't think that it will increase productivity. It will increase output, but there will be more people engaged. And when you divide output by people engaged, you'll probably get a lower output in the end, because the ones you're adding will not be as productive as the ones already there.
So, in one of the slides that Anu showed near the beginning of her presentation, actually, when she was talking specifically sector by sector, the 4 sectors with the tightest labor markets as measured just by vacancy rate across the countries that we looked at in advanced economies were 1, leisure and hospitality, followed by healthcare, followed by professional services, followed quite closely by construction. Do you have a view on whether those will continue to be, and for how long, the tightest, at least by this measure, sectors?
I'd be happy to try to answer. Or
Yeah.
Chris, please go ahead. I'll go second.
Sorry, I was going to say, David, why don't you read the first? Okay, I'll mention something. Leisure and hospitality, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
In fact, parenthetically, I'm engaging in a little bit of leisure and hospitality now in Europe over here, and I can see that there would be that there's no other way of doing it. Actually, I mean, I'd hate to go to be on vacation, go to a nice location, and go to a restaurant, and the little robot comes along and says, "You are all there, sir." I mean, you do want good personal service, and we see that everywhere. It's shortages there will persist. What I say about that is that the way to deal with that is to find ways and make sure that these become attractive jobs, that they're jobs that people are proud when they're doing them, and when they provide a good service, not as a bore or saying, "Oh, I can't be bothered serving other people," blah blah, like that. And it is possible to do it. Allow more time flexibility, allow more autonomy in the job, let people choose what they do, improve the communication, make the job in leisure and hospitality sound like we're all together providing this excellent service, and of course getting paid well. There we cannot avoid it. In construction, I think we can probably, mechanization will probably deal with the problem to some extent. I let David comment a little bit now.
Yeah, I think this is an incredibly hard problem for automation and robotics. It's much easier to make things that work in the abstract and the cognitive world than things that work in the physical world, where you can't hallucinate. There is very little room for error, and the world is very unpredictable and dangerous. You're driving, if you're doing construction, even if you're working around a hot grill for cooking. So, I talked to roboticists about this and asked, the question, like, how long will it be before I can call a robotic plumber who will come to my house and replace my water heater? And the answer I get is, well, maybe never. How does never sound? Because that's such a hard problem, because it requires not just dexterity, but, like if you take out someone's old hot water heater, well, maybe there's an old pipe that's going to split, and there's a valve that's leaking, and there's wires around. And so it requires a ton of common sense, of dexterity, and of judgment that's going to be very challenging to automate in the physical world. So I think this has been true for a long time, that computing has actually been much better at relatively higher paid, higher educated cognitive tasks because they're formal than it has been at dexterous manual tasks that require sightedness, flexibility, common sense, communication, and so on. So I think we're going to be in that world for a long time. Sure, I think AI is going to speed up progress in robotics, but I just don't think it's going to be like they will introduce, robot GPT, next November, and we'll all have one. So I think, but I do think actually I think it was implied by another question I saw that some people will just choose against now going into white collar work and into college and say, well, look, looks better. Working in construction, working in the skilled trades, working as a contractor, and that would be great. It's actually the case that in many of those occupations, certainly in the United States, workers are relatively old because when people don't enter an occupation, the incumbents, there's not turnover, and so the median age rises, and that's true in people who work in utilities, people who do power lines, people who do home repair and construction. So that could be a healthy rebalancing. And the quote return to college in the United States, and actually in much of the industrialized world, has plateaued or fallen over the last 15 years. So, and the cost of college has not come down as far as I've noticed. So there's, there may be a better alternative. So that would be a healthy rebalancing, especially, again, I'm speaking US centrically, but we're in the midst, hopefully, of a big rebuilding of infrastructure, of our power system, of transmission lines, of the way we generate energy, and and hopefully some manufacturing. And that requires labor, requires skilled, dexterous, able-bodied adults. And so that I think will turn out to be an attractive sector. Now, what Chris said on my last point about food services and so on, and those do pay poorly in almost all of the world, relatively low in the pay spectrum because the set of skills and expertise required is not that high. So many people can do that work, and that limits how high wages can go. However, the degree of economic security that a person working at McDonald's has in Denmark or Scandinavia, and more broadly relative to the United States, is just light years apart. And so certainly those jobs could be made higher paid, more secure, with guaranteed access to healthcare universally, with paid vacation, paid family leave. And that may sound insane to a US audience, but that's actually the norm in much of the industrialized world. So, and if those jobs were better and better remunerated, people would like them more and feel happier and feel greater esteem in doing them. And that would be a healthy rebalancing as well. Pause there.
So, I mean, Chris, I guess for you both, do you think that there is a potential rebalancing across sectors in the offing? And maybe even I'll add to that, would that also entail a rebalancing of relative pay scales across sorts of jobs?
Unfortunately, actually, it's difficult to see now how jobs could rebound on the quality, on the well-being side. It's the main research that I'm being engaged now in Britain is sort of how to make sure that the jobs that are coming on now are what you might describe as good jobs, that they are both productive, but productivity is something that everyone involved in labor markets has talked about, but not many people talk about the well-being of workers, which contributes to productivity, of course, which makes them well-paying jobs and attractive jobs to go to. When we're looking at surveys of life satisfaction and job satisfaction, going to work is one of the things that gives the least happiness to people. In fact, only being sick in bed is worse than going to work, which of course is not something that you would want to see. So although we're going to have sort of some sectors creating more jobs, especially in service provision. We're going to see others being automated, closing down. I don't see the number of jobs overall going down, but I do see the necessity of transitions. I don't see the new jobs coming on, sort of finding an easy way of becoming really attractive in terms of pay. You see the difference with manufacturing. When manufacturing was growing, is that all the new jobs were under one roof in a factory or in these very big enterprises. Labor could both get organized and negotiate, but it was also becoming better known to the employer. I mean, there are famous stories about Ford, for example, how he was treating his workers and so on. And then it was easy to share the rewards, if you like, from work between workers and employers, between labor and capital. What we've been observing recently is a fall in the share of labor, and that, of course, is reflected in the quality of jobs that are being created. It doesn't have to be like this, but especially in the United States, some Northern European countries maybe succeeded in doing it, but it's not something where I can see an easy solution. That doesn't mean we should give up trying, but it's going to be hard work.
David?
Okay, I'll disagree with Chris just since it's always good to have an argument for the sake of the audience, and then we can but not disagreeing violently. But let me say, first of all, one of the things that makes people happiest in work is being better paid, and it sounds crass, but it's really true. That's the strongest predictor of how much they like their jobs, and pay did rise in low-paid jobs. Certainly in the United States during the pandemic, we had real wage compression, and meaning the difference between the 90th and the 10th percentile earning worker closed, and it closed because the bottom came up, not just because the top came down. And workers' self-reported satisfaction with jobs in the United States is the highest it's ever been. And that wasn't, and that's an impressive accomplishment. And it reflects that employers are having to work harder. So, employers will pay more if they have to. And they'll pay less if they can get away with it. That's how markets work, unless you have, negotiation and third-party, labor market intermediaries, which we have very few of in the United States, arguably too few. So I think there's room for improvement, and employers treat workers better when they have to, and they invest in them. And this is a part also, and one should not think that this is sort of, there's no degrees of freedom here. Employers just do what the market commands, because there are different employers with different ways of managing workers of the same skill level to do similar things. You just give you one tiny example. My colleague at MIT Sloan, Zeynep Tan, who runs the Good Jobs Institute, she works with organizations to change the way they use low-paid labor. And changing the way they use low-paid labor doesn't just mean paying them more. It means re-engineering the way they work so they can use low-paid workers more productively and therefore pay them more and give them more security. So working with Sam's Club, which is the kind of Walmart's version of Costco in the United States, a big box store, she helped them reduce the number of roles in that company of low-paid workers from like 60 to approximately a dozen, meaning that people were much more broadly cross-trained. And that meant that workers had more interesting jobs with greater upward mobility. And it also changed the nature of staffing, because if a worker was out and they said, oh, we don't have anyone for the laundry detergent shelves, they'd say, okay, well, take someone from the hardware shelf. They know how to do that. That wasn't previously possible when the jobs were so narrow. So many people have the idea, well, manufacturing has stable demand, therefore it can have steady hours, and services have unstable demand that fluctuates over times of days and days of the week, so it can't have stable hours. But that's not true, actually, if people are cross-trained and you can use them in a more flexible way. So I think there's real opportunity, and employers will get creative when the going gets tough, and I think that's good. I'm looking forward to seeing more of that.
Well, I'll ask you, Chris, you should feel free to respond to that, or yeah.
I obviously agree with the principle that when things get tough, employers will respond and will pay more. But I don't really see. Maybe in the United States there's more competition for jobs. Wages are more flexible, and all that. But the labor share is nowhere near it was in 1990 kind of thing, let alone 1980 when it started falling. There's a long way to go to get back to where we were before. Now, the question though that I like, which is something we don't see in Europe, I should say, especially in Britain, you don't see that at all. Labour was so disgruntled in Britain with the Labour government, with the then government. It explains the result in the recent elections, how they ran away from the ruling party and they voted for whoever they could find less objectionable on the ballot paper. What I should say though is is in terms of the satisfaction people get. Pay is very important, especially for full-time workers, in the sense that the worst thing that could happen to someone at work is to get a pay cut. There will be revolution within the job. But if you look at marginal improvements in well-being at work, in answer to the question of what will make you find your job more satisfying, then in the surveys I've seen, admittedly mainly UK, but the rest of Europe as well, more pay comes sort of halfway down. The first would be more respect for the employer, more autonomy, more time flexibility. These things that people want. And if you ask the groups we were talking about before, women, older workers, and someone asking a question remotely that I've just seen, what about disabled people, people with other special needs, and so on, then it's not pay that is the main thing that they say they want to make the job more attractive and all that. They will say, like what women would mention first would be time flexibility, and employer who respects time off work for family reasons. You see a lot of people talking about health post-COVID, an employer who understands our health needs and who will welcome absence, or at least not complain if there is an absence for health reasons one day or so. It's a much more complicated issue, if you like, than restoring the quality of the job.
I just want to add one thing. There was a question about sort of people with physical limitations and BIPOC, and I do think there's another area, and also a group that should also be mentioned is returning citizens from incarceration. And employers are much more accommodating when labor markets are very tight. We have seen rebounds in employment population rates of people with work limitations, for people with incarceration histories, and whatever prejudices employers have towards BIPOC and other workers. I'm not condoning that, but they will be more likely to overcome them when they need to get workers, and workers are scarce. So again, there are many virtues of tight labor markets in terms of causing employers to work harder to accommodate and to find ways to work with people. I should also mention that our current tight labor market stems from macroeconomic conditions, right? From a lot of, from demographics and a lot of spending and so on. But I think that we have insufficient competition policy to ensure that labor markets, quote, remain tight, that employers remain competitive, even when we're not in boom times. And that we should be concerned that, in fact, macroeconomic events like the one we have now, they come around every 20 years or so, maybe every 25, right? Where things are this tight. And that's when wage gains happen at the bottom. But we should do more to ensure we have adequate competition among employers at all times, not just in extraordinary times, because that raises wages, but it also reallocates workers towards more productive employers. So I think in the US, we suffer from insufficient competition in low-paid labor markets during normal times.
So let me actually take the tail end of what you said, David, the point around reallocation of workers to transition us into our Q&A. And a question for you, Chris. One of the things that Anu talked about when she was giving her remarks was the degree to which jobs transitions will need to occur over the next, call it 10 years, just given broad trends. So some of that's AI, but of course, some of it is things like aging and the need for more healthcare, the shift to e-commerce rather than in-store purchase. And the person asked, what is it? Why is Europe under more strain, or will Europe be under more strain than the US? So if you could speak probably to the broad topic, but also that question.
Yes. Well, first, let me say that what Anu said is absolutely right, that we need a lot of job transitions, occupational transitions, with the new technologies coming along, with the new demographics coming along. Now, the difference between Europe and the United States is that traditionally Europeans have moved much less between jobs in their lifetimes. And geographically, in fact, they move much less. You know, we don't have the completely declining cities in Europe, in one part of the country, and rising in another with new technologies and new occupations. And so, if you look at what you want the end result to be, which is very similar in Europe, especially Western Europe, in the United States, where we want to get to. Given the transitions that have been taking place traditionally in the United States, if they're now directed to that need, what we want the end result to be, we'll get there quickly. We don't need to increase transitions to get there within specified time, say within the next decade. But if you look at Europe, if we keep going at the slow pace that we were going before in transitioning between jobs, we won't get there in 10 years. In fact, we're talking about 2035 and beyond. And then you might ask, why are Europeans so much less mobile? Maybe language, culture has a role to play, despite the fact that we have a single market in Europe. Unfortunately, Britain is outside that big single market, but that's what the British public decided in a referendum. What can we do? They can't all vote like us, unfortunately. Despite that, they still regard their nationality not to be European primarily, but to be their own country. The Italian will be primarily an Italian and then a European. The French person will be the same. The Spaniard will be the same. And that restricts migration within Europe a lot.
So overall, in Europe, in the US, even as you say, if we can kind of continue as we have been in some form, there does need to be, and we've talked about this, there does need to be some real skills transition and upskilling. And David, a question that came in, maybe I'll ask you, is what role does apprenticeship play in this? Does it take a new role that it hasn't, at least over recent past?
Yeah, I mean, apprenticeship actually, surprisingly, is something that both the Trump and Biden administrations have supported, although differently, because the Biden administration supported them through trade unions and the Trump administration through non-union apprentices. But it is the same that a lot of the skilled trades, you do a lot of the learning they're highly skilled, they're highly practiced, they have a tremendous expertise, but it comes from learning in situ, from doing stuff, not just sitting in classrooms, right? So you can be you can learn a lot of the computer programming trade in a classroom, but that's not going to be true for plumbing and electrical work and many other things, because it's learned through practice, learned through hands-on. Just like being a pilot, you have to be in a flight simulator. You can't just sit in a classroom and learn to fly. So apprenticeship in the US in particular has a very disorganized an incomplete vocational system, unlike many Western European countries. So Switzerland and Germany and Austria would be good examples of countries that really have very well structured apprenticeship pipelines for getting people into skilled vocations. So I think apprenticeships, I think we have focused for so long in the United States on getting everyone to college, right? Universal college education. When we don't actually need everyone to have a college education, not everyone wants a college education, but we do need skilled people throughout the economy to do many dexterous and expert tasks, and building out that structure more effectively is I think essential. Apprenticeships are one of the routes into, certainly if we're talking about all the infrastructure building and rebuilding and all the electrical rewiring and grid rebuilding. That's going to take a lot of people in skilled trades, and apprenticeship is a crucial part of that.
Separate question for either one of you. We've had a couple of questions along the lines of, it's all very nice to be talking about advanced economies, but of course this is all operating within a global production system. What are the implications from a global point of view of the tight labor markets in the US? And I don't know if either one of you would, I'll call on one of you, but if one of you wants to jump in on that. Chris, you?
Well, in terms of tight labor markets generally, I would, Europe, I think there's going to be strong pressure for immigration, people coming in, they're seeing the jobs, they're seeing the pay. Unfortunately, the issue has become so politicized, especially in Europe, I suspect in the United States actually as well, from what I hear. I mean, I do follow, especially the pre-election campaign now. Sometimes I get the feeling that governments don't even think rationally what to do about immigration. Like mention immigration, maybe we should think about it, and then you've lost the election. It's gone without any qualifications or anything like that. And in fact, that does worry me. As a European, it does worry me actually, that the pressure coming from the South and the Middle East, given what we've seen, because if anything could break up the European Union, it would be that. Now, if the question, I think the question, I'm not sure if it was the same question, but it was also addressing the issue of can we not offshore production?
We had a couple on the same theme, so yeah.
Yes. Now we tried that with China, and it was very successful, of course, until geopolitical tensions came along. It was very successful for China up to about 1910, maybe 2010, maybe a little below. But the supply chains are breaking down completely. There is domestication. They're coming back. But I think that is a solution. What I think maybe it's the World Economic Forum that called it friendshoring. Find friendly countries, offshoring to Mexico or further south in South America. I don't know where we would offshore within Europe, but I leave it at that for next time.
So with that, we're alas very close to the end. And so if I can ask each of you as a sort of wrap, of course, we've got an audience that is not exclusively, but I think largely from the private sector, and thinking about the workforce in their companies going forward. If you had to give a quick piece of advice, and Chris, maybe start with you and David to end. If you had to give a sort of 2-sentence piece of advice, what would that advice be?
I say treat your workers as your stakeholders. Give them more autonomy to choose what training to do within the company, discuss their roles, explain where the technology you're adopting is going, and ask them what they can do best. Because now technology and the way work is organized is too complicated for one person or a small or 2 or 3 people at the top knowing what's going on. Engage more with people, workers down the line, and find the best match between the new technologies and the skills of the workers and the opportunities that the workers have. And then you get into what I think MGI called, maybe in this session too, but certainly passed as the people's business, people's friendly business. Let me put it that way.
People plus performance is, I think, Anu's.
Well, performance will come by
Yeah.
being. I think that.
Yeah. David.
Yeah, let me add, I mean, I think use workers well, and I think there's opportunity. And I think, the example I gave of Zeynep's work earlier suggests that it's not just about the skills the worker brings to the table, but the way how employers train and organize and treat people and figure out how to use them efficiently. And I think we have a new set of tools that we're all trying to figure out how to use. And that's going to change the composition of teams and who can do what. And by teams, I don't mean the Microsoft product. So you say, well, actually, we don't need PhDs for all this. For all this software coding, we could use people who have a vocational degree, or there are just ways to reallocate and think hard about how to break out of the mold of everything needs to be done by a college graduate, and think about how to expand you have new tools and you have different demographic circumstances. Put those things together productively to use people effectively and in a way that will not just produce good results, but make them enable them to feel good about doing it, and so they'll want to keep doing it.
Chris, David, thank you so much for joining us. To all of you, our audience, thank you. Really appreciate your being here and all of your questions. You can access our research using the short links that you see on this page, and we'll certainly share a replay with you once this is all done. We'd also, as always, hugely appreciate if you were to fill in a brief survey that's going to appear at the end of the session. So again, thank you very much, everyone, and have a nice day.